Welcome to our lecture on whether American Jews have a strategy, and if so, what it may be. With us today to think through this issue is Caroline Glick, one of the sharpest, clearest, and most prolific thinkers in the world of Jewish affairs. Caroline is a senior columnist at Israel Hayom and at Newsweek. She served as senior columnist and senior contributing editor at the Jerusalem Post from 2002 to 2019, and as senior columnist at Ma'ariv Hebrew newspaper from 2014 to 2019. She's written 2 books so far and is working on her third. Her book, The Israeli Solution, A One-State Plan for Peace in the Middle East, was endorsed by leading U.S. policymakers, including Vice President Mike Pence, Senator Ted Cruz, and former National Security Advisor John Bolton. Her book, Shackled Warrior, Israel and the Global Jihad, was endorsed by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and former CIA Director James Woolsey. She is currently writing a book on the future of American Jewry. Caroline is the Senior Fellow for Middle Eastern Affairs at the Center for Security Policy in Washington, D.C., and the founder and editor-in-chief of Latma, a Hebrew-language satirical television program now in its 2nd season on Israel Channel 20. Caroline, we look forward to hearing your thoughts on American Jewry and the way forward.
Well, thanks so much, Alana, for that very kind introduction. The American Jewish community cannot have an overall strategy for survival or anything else because there's not enough unity in the community to formulate a comprehensive strategy. What we do see rather than strategies are trends, and both the internal and external trends that are most prominent among American Jews are disastrous. In fact, they're suicidal. And having given that kind of a brief introduction, let me just get into the details, and then we can talk about what a strategy for survival would look like. So internally, the trend is that there's an increasing sense among American Jews that there's nothing intrinsically worthwhile about Judaism, certainly not anything that's worth dedicating one's life to. We see this most prominently in intermarriage. We also see it in low marriage rates, we see it in low fertility rates, and we see it in low Jewish literacy. Fewer and fewer Jews are getting married, fewer and fewer Jews are marrying Jews, fewer and fewer Jewish children are being born, and fewer Jewish children are receiving Jewish educations. Only 15% of American Jews aged 25 to 54, so that's basically marital and child-rearing ages, are married to Jews and raising Jewish children. Only 50% of Jewish Americans between the ages of 25 and 54 are married. What this means is that a large majority of American Jews have an attenuated, shallow relationship with Judaism. By and large, this generation will not produce another generation of attenuated Jews. Moreover, and I think most importantly from a strategic perspective, is that you see a lot of intolerance among these attenuated Jewish communities towards people who are trying to actually buck the trend of assimilation. For instance, Jack Wertheimer wrote an article for Mosaic a couple of years ago where he was talking about the fight really against in-marriage. And he mentioned 2 things or 2 examples which I thought were really indicative. The first one was that rabbis in their synagogues are punished by their members if the rabbis refuse to perform intermarriages. The family of the young person who wants to get married to a non-Jew ends up leaving the congregation or otherwise lashing out at the rabbi for refusing to engage in to oversee intermarriage chupot. And the other thing that he mentioned, the other example, was a Reform rabbi who was trying to encourage his members to date Jews and marry Jews by giving them free memberships in JDate. And there was a huge outcry of members of the community against him for doing so. We also see this in social conservative Jews in Reform and conservative communities that are reporting increasing incidents of them not being welcome in the pews of their synagogues and being forced to leave. This is one of the explanations for the growth, for instance, of Chabad in the United States, is Reform and conservative Jews that are forced to leave their congregations for not being part of the in crowd. And that really brings us to the external trend that is also suicidal in terms of the American Jewish community, and that's a relationship between the community and the outside world. On the outside, as we all know, anti-Semitism is rising significantly in the United States these days, and you see it in all three forms or major forms of anti-Semitism in America: Islamic anti-Semitism, right-wing anti-Semitism, and left-wing anti-Semitism. And I think that at this point it's inarguable that the most powerful form of anti-Semitism in the United States is left-wing anti-Semitism. It's become mainstream on the political left in the United States. We see this, for instance, recently NBC, in the space of 1 week, broadcast 2 shows that had viciously anti-Semitic parts to them. That was both in Saturday Night Live and in the drama series Nurses. Both of them broadcast massively anti-Semitic scenes. There was no apology from NBC, and the outcry from the Jewish community wasn't that strong anyway. But that's mainstreaming. The other aspect of mainstreaming of left-wing anti-Semitism we saw, for instance, in the actions of New York Governor Andrew Cuomo and New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio during the COVID-19 epidemic, that both of these politicians actually used anti-Semitism, incitement against ultra-Orthodox Jews, particularly in Brooklyn, but in the wider metropolitan area of New York City, as a tool for political mobilization, which, as we've learned from Ruth Weiss, is really, one of the key aspects of the political power of anti-Semitism, that it can be used as a tool for political mobilization, and it's being used by prominent Democratic politicians on the left. So that's really a sense of just how powerful it's become. And then this brings us back to the Jews themselves. How are the Jews acting to this? So I think one place to look for an understanding of what the Jews are doing in response is to the 2013 Pew survey, because one of the questions there of the American Jewish community, that entire survey, of course, if you haven't looked at it, is worth studying in depth. But one of, I think, the most notable questions that the survey asked was they asked American Jews what they thought what the most essential aspect of Judaism is. And whereas only 19% of them said that Jewish law was the essential part, the component of Judaism, and 43% said that supporting Israel or caring about Israel was an essential part of Judaism, 69% said that leading a moral life is the essential component of Judaism, and 56% said that pursuing social justice and equality is a key aspect of Judaism. And these numbers, which aren't all the questions that they were asked, but these numbers are notable because the latter two things that majorities of American Jews said were the key component of Judaism are not specifically Jewish at all. They're universalist aspirations. Catholics, Protestants, Muslims can all point to wanting to pursue social justice and equality, or leading a just and moral life. These things are obviously aspirations that they could just as easily express regarding their faiths and their creeds. There's nothing specifically Jewish about it. They're universal. And the universalist bent of American Jews finds its expression on a daily basis among non-Orthodox Jews in particular in the concept of tikkun olam, or repairing the world. As Jonathan Newman wrote in his book on the subject, tikkun olam, as it's understood and taught by the reform and conservative movements today in America, has no roots in Jewish sources. In other words, tikkun olam is a Jewish-sounding concept that describes beliefs and modes of behavior that aren't specifically Jewish, and in certain cases aren't Jewish at all. But today, tikkun olam, as practiced by Reform and conservative Jews in particular, is a central creed of Jewish communities that themselves suffer from Jewish illiteracy to alarming degrees. And tikkun olam, as it is practiced today, is indistinguishable, and indeed it's actually fused with whatever it is that the Democratic Party supports at any particular time. And this is an existential problem for American Jews today as opposed to in the past, because today, and really in a move from between 5 and 15 years, depending on how you count, the Democratic Party has embraced anti-Semitism. And we were talking before about Bill de Blasio and Andrew Cuomo and their instrumental use of anti-Semitism as a mobilizing tool for political support, but we see it in the rise of the Squad in the Democrat Congressional Caucus. I mean, the members of the Squad that grew in the recent elections are openly anti-Semitic. Rashida Tlaib, Ilhan Omar have repeatedly expressed anti-Semitic positions, and Ilhan Omar was just promoted to the position of chairman of a committee, of a subcommittee in the House Foreign Affairs Committee, as a reward, really, for her behavior, and her behavior, the signature aspect of her behavior in Congress over the past 2 years has been her promotion of anti-Semitism in American society. The Democratic Party as a whole has embraced anti-Israel, pro-Iran, and pro-Palestinian positions. Recently, in a White House press briefing, Jen Psaki, the White House spokeswoman, could not say whether BDS, boycott, sanctions, and divestment from Israel and its supporters in the United States, of course, is an anti-Semitic movement. Then we have in other things in terms of hiding Black and minority anti-Semitic attacks against Jews, support for the Black Lives Matter campaigns when Black Lives Matter is openly anti-Semitic in their beliefs and in their views of Israel, and Jews who support Israel and American-Israel relations, and the upholding and mainstreaming of Louis Farrakhan by progressives, by the Democrat Party, which we saw maybe most emblematically expressed in Bill Clinton sitting next to Louis Farrakhan at Aretha Franklin's funeral a couple of years ago. So for Jews, though, today, embracing Tikkun Olam, which again has fused with the Democratic Party, actually means doing one of three things. It means actually being anti-Semitic, or engaging in apologetics for leftist or Democrat anti-Semitism, or just doing nothing about it. And I think, the first of actually getting involved in anti-Semitism, we see with organizations, of course, like Jewish Voice for Peace. We see in Jewish intellectuals like Peter Beinart. These are people who are actively promoting anti-Semitism on campuses and really throughout the United States, casting aspersion on Jews in the United States who are pro-Israel and denying Israel's right to exist. Then you have the apologetics, and I think, a very clear and very distressing example of that we saw last month was a statement by Obama's ambassador to Israel, Dan Shapiro, in an online seminar that the Jewish Democratic conference, or whatever it's called, had about the Biden administration. And specifically, he was asked what he thought about the attacks by Israeli Jews and American Jews against senior officials in the Biden administration, specifically Assistant Secretary of State for Israel-Palestine, Hadi Amar, a Senior Director for Intelligence at the National Security Council, Meir Bitar, and the Deputy Legislative Director at the White House, Rima Doden, what he thought about their criticism of the three. All three have openly supported Palestinian terrorism. They're activists, and two of them have been activists in the BDS movement on campuses. And they all essentially have made clear that they don't support Israel's right to exist at all. And Shapiro categorized or characterized criticism by Jews in the United States and Israel of the three and their appointments as racist. So now it's become racist for Dan Shapiro for Jews to actually stand up and oppose the inclusion of anti-Semites in senior positions that are related to Israel, or generally speaking, in the Biden administration, which I thought was pretty extraordinary and extraordinarily disturbing. And then, of course, we have the Anti-Defamation League by Jonathan Greenblatt, who have been systematically underreporting left-wing anti-Semitism in the United States and engaging with and cooperating with Al Sharpton, who I think may be the most prominent civil rights leader in the United States, or African-American leader in the United States at all accounts, who was actually responsible for inciting a pogrom. It was Sharpton who, of course, incited the 1991 pogrom against the Jews of Crown Heights that led to one Jew being murdered. And he's never apologized for that. And yet now the ADL is cooperating with him, despite the fact that he's never apologized for causing the death of an innocent Jewish man. So when you take all of these together, when you take the internal trend of assimilation and opposing efforts not to encourage Jews not to assimilate, and you take the tikkun olam dominance of the Jewish world and the non-Orthodox Jewish world, which is a universalist, not particularly Jewish concept of faith that has really fused the Democratic Party and non-Orthodox Judaism in the United States, you see that around 3/4 of American Jews are not going to be putting up any fight to preserve the Jewish community of America. They're not going to fight assimilation. They're not going to fight assimilations in their own families. They're not going to fight assimilation in their communities, and they will lash out at those who try. You're going to have 3/4 of American Jews who are not going to fight anti-Semitism in any coherent fashion, and they're not going to fight for Israel. But the good news is that not everything is lost, not all is lost, because there is a last quarter of the American Jewish community, and that quarter really is Jews who, I think their strongest characteristics are either their orthodoxy or their Zionism, and they're distinct from and increasingly shunned by the 75% majority of the Jewish community in the United States. We can just, for instance, look at the communal responses to the Tree of Life massacre on the one hand of the Jews by the white supremacists, and the communal response to the massacre at this kosher supermarket at Jersey City, where Jews were massacred by Black anti-Semites. But this 25% of American Jews vote as Jews. They live as Jews. They're particularistic Jews. They don't vote on immigration. They don't vote on LGBT rights or other progressive issues. They vote on Jewish issues. They vote on Israel. They vote on school choice, vouchers. They vote on religious freedom. And when they go to the polls, they ask, what's good for the Jews? Who's good for the Jews? These are what I call the Jewy Jews. And they're going to remain Jews in this generation and in all likelihood into the future, because unlike the 75%, they do see an intrinsic value of being Jewish, distinctively Jewish, particularistically Jewish, and they see a value in maintaining their distinctive, particularistic Judaism and transferring it to the next generation. The Orthodox is, of course, very obvious both in the high marriage rates, the high fertility rates, 4+ children per family, and in their very low intermarriage rates. And in Zionism, I think this is a very important component of Jewish identity for Jews who can't make that lifestyle change, who have been raised in secular humanism, and it's difficult for them to embrace a Torah lifestyle, which is totally fine. And it's a way to preserve their Jewish identity and make it a central component of their lives in a meaningful way. And they do this not by embracing the peace process, they do it by embracing Israel and Zionism. And when I say not by embracing the peace process, I think it's important to understand that one of the big falls, one of the big sort of drop-offs of the American Jewish community in terms of Jewish identity came in the 1990s, when supporting Israel became sort of a synonym in popular parlance for supporting Israel. And of course, the two are not at all the same. And so when we talk about supporting Israel, we're not asking where you stand on the territories, where you stand on the settlements. We're asking, do you understand the centrality of the people of Israel and the land of Israel in the Jewish world, in the Jewish experience? I think that making the land and the people of Israel central component of a Jewish identity gets you halfway, by the way, to also viewing Torah of Israel as a central aspect of the Jewish community, whether you believe it or not. But beyond that, it gives meaning and balance and focus to a Jewish life, to a specifically Jewish life. This can mean connecting physically with Israel by making Aliyah, or it can mean connecting and making Israel central to your Jewish identity organizationally. But the fact is that Jewish continuity through the ages, from the time of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob to the present time, has always rested on three legs: the Torah of Israel, the people of Israel, and the land of Israel, not on universalism. Those are the three foundations of the Jewish people. And embracing Zionism, as I said, will get you 2 and maybe even 2.5, depending on you look at it. And embracing Torah and Orthodox Judaism brings you all 3 at once. Both of them are strategies for Jewish survival in the United States and everywhere else, because again, both of them imbue the lives of Jews with intrinsic meaning as Jews and give people who embrace these things reason to sustain those 3 aspects, or 2 of them, or 1 of them, into the future and into the generations to come. And I think that the 25% that we see doing that are well on their road to both thriving in the United States and in Israel, and also to carrying that on to the generations to come. So it's a mixed message about the future of American Jews, and there isn't really anything here that's going to surprise most of the people in the audience today. But I think that it's very important to see things as they are, to understand the underlying characteristics of the community and the trends that are pushing it forward or backwards or into extinction, or pushing them forward into the world. The more people that embrace Zionism and or Orthodox Judaism, the more Jews in the United States will survive, and the more the community will thrive into the future.
Well, I only wish there were time for questions. We look forward to reading your book when it comes out. Thank you for joining us today.